Hello, when I first started flying fixed-wing RC a few years ago, I was told that when you're gliding, it's better to brake the prop instead of letting it freewheel because that would cause less drag and you'd be able to glide for longer, more efficiently. And at the time I just took it for granted, and most people seem to think that, and it was the consensus and the foregone conclusion and so on. So I was just like, oh, okay, and left it at that. But one day I started to wonder, why would it be the case that freewheeling would cause more drag? So let me show you with this little diagram why it didn't seem to make sense to me and why I did this experiment that you're about to see. So let's say we have a river and the water is flowing in the river from left to right like that. And for some strange reason you have been tasked with holding a barn door in the river. So you've got to stand out in the middle of the river and you've got to hold a barn door, and it's like this here, so you can stand there. If you were kind of dumb, you would stand like that. Oh, let me explain the other task that you've been given. The other task is that you are not to disrupt the flow of the water. So the water is to come in from the left side of the screen, go straight as possible out the right side of the screen without being disturbed. No turbulence or eddies or swirls or anything like that. So if you were a bit of a dummy, you might stand like that. If you're a bit smarter, you might stand like that, so that basically the effect of your barn door on the water is almost nothing. You might also stand like that, which would be kind of somewhere in the middle. I hope we can agree on that. But let's say we change the rules here and I say that you have to hold this 45-degree angle like that. That's the only angle you can have. But you're allowed to walk around in the river. And yep, I know, you're very cunning, aren't you? You already decided that you're going to walk downstream. But no, you're not allowed to do that because I'm going to make a new rule. You can only walk side to side, perpendicular to the flow of the water, along this dashed line. And at this point, the banks of the river kind of a bit of a distraction. So pretend that there's no banks on the river. This is just an infinitely wide river with water flowing from the left to the right. Now, you're allowed to walk whichever direction you want, up or down or nowhere, and as fast as you like as well. So what do? The only sensible solution to me seems to be to walk like this, at the same speed, or as close as you can possibly get to the speed of the water that's coming in. If you're really dumb, you'd go that way. But that would be like, as the water comes in, you're not only stopping it from going that way, well, what am I trying to say? You're kind of shoveling it towards the left. So you're not only stopping it from flowing that way, but you're actually actively pushing it downwards. But if you were to be moving upwards like this at the same speed that the water is moving, just in my mind's eye, I'm picturing like molecules of water coming along like this. And as they get to here and they're just about to bang into your barn door, you move it out of the way a little bit like that. So now they're free to move to here, to that point, and then you move it out of the way a little bit. So all the way along, they're not really getting to collide into it as, with any sort of a force. Does that make sense? Seems to make sense to me. And it also seems logical to me that if you were just standing there without moving, that would be more of an obstruction to the water flow. And I was looking around on the internet for discussions about this, and I found one on RC groups. There was some on Stack Overflow somewhere as well, Aviation Stack Overflow. It's quite a good site there. But the thread on RC groups in particular was quite revealing. There were some people that would swear on their mother's grave that breaking the prop was the only way to go. But there were also other people in the opposite camp. And it sort of struck me that it might be one of these things that when you get two groups of people who are just adamantly insisting that their way is the right way, there may be some truth to both sides, is what I began to think. So since I have this Arduino thrust test stand thingy sitting around, I thought I might do a few experiments and get to the bottom of what is actually going on. Okay, this is the test setup. Down this end we have a power supply, and that's set to approximately a 4S LiPo voltage there, because this motor that I'm using here is apparently 4S only. Seems to be alright a little bit higher, but interestingly I found that even at a higher voltage I couldn't get this to produce more than about 40 kilometers an hour of airspeed in that direction. So I'm just going to stick with 40 kilometers an hour as my top airspeed for this, for the start, and see if that's good enough. And anyway, that comes down to an ESC over there. ESC is controlled by the Arduino, and there's a load cell amplifier thing there, and a load cell in there. That's a 1 kilo one, so we can get some reasonably high resolution results, hopefully. And then up here we have a prop, and the prop is on a motor bell. I cut all the magnets off this motor bell so that it wouldn't cog as it spun around. So now it's if you can just get it in there. It's almost as free as a prop balancing thing, but not quite. Anyway, there's no magnetic resistance from these coils or anything. That's what I'm getting at. And the profile of this piece here, I've tried to make this as thin as possible. These are 1mm pieces of aluminium, 1mm thick, I mean. And unfortunately, it kind of wobbles a little bit, sometimes like that. Works up a bit of a jiggle like that, but I don't think that's an issue. But obviously I wanted as much air to go through that as possible. Couldn't really get air to go through this bit here with the motors on, but that's too bad. Anyway, so connected over here we have a laptop, and you can see some lines on my thrust testing application here. So this is in my GitHub. If you want to see more about this, I'll link to the video where I explain all this in the description. And if I just push on this again, you'll see behind all that dust on my laptop screen some thrust showing up there in the yellow line. It's not calibrated at the moment, so it's supposed to be on 0 right now, but it's on -6. I'll have to calibrate that in a minute. But over here we have some controls, and I won't go into detail too much, but what this lets me do is set up a scripted test, so I can say hold the motor at a certain throttle for 10 seconds, and then another certain throttle for another 10 seconds, and that's what I'm going to be doing. And to know what certain throttle we want to use, I stuck this on here. I've just finished calibrating this now, but I stuck my airspeed sensor on there like that, without the prop in the way, of course. And I figured out what throttle settings this ESC and that voltage and this motor and prop and everything would need to be in order to meet 10 kilometers an hour airspeed, 20, 30, and also 40. I wanted to go up to 100, but I guess this prop here that I've got, and the motor and everything, just can't really do that. It's a 17 by 6, I think, prop. It's the biggest one I have, so I can't really go any higher on that one at the moment. And over here, obviously, we'll be trying some smaller ones, those, and also a bunch more that I have in the box there. So hopefully that test, or this test setup stuff, makes sense to everybody. Well, that's interesting, look at that. If I just pause these results here, we see the yellow line is the thrust, so the one at the bottom. And what's interesting, the purple line, it's a bit hard to see these colours here, but the top line is purple, that's the throttle signal. And it's interesting that we get a bump up in thrust until the prop stabilizes at the constant speed each time the throttle changes. Interesting. And here's something else that's interesting. After that test finished, the prop had pulled itself forward because it had gained some, it was still spinning. And when the airflow coming from this direction stopped, it was able to, yank itself out of here a little bit. It's not stuck in, oops, it just sort of slides in there. So it had some residual energy to create some forward thrust. So to break the prop and hold it in place, I'm just going to put some sellotape over here like that. And it does kind of stick out, I guess, a tiny little bit into the airflow, but only a minuscule amount. And it's all mostly in this cylindrical cone here behind the prop nut. So hopefully nobody's going to complain about that. Alright, I just did the first test with the braked prop. This is an 11 by 7, by the way. And unfortunately it was kind of wobbling around a bit sideways more than it was when it was able to freely spin. But I don't think that matters too much because we're only measuring the load in that axis there. More interesting though was it was producing more drag. So it's you can see there, what does that say, 88 grams of thrust there at the highest. So this is a 40 kilometer an hour
airspeed there. It was only about 62 when the prop was freewheeling, so this is quite interestingly, and I'm glad I did this test now because it'll make a more interesting video if it's controversial, I guess. So anyway, now I've got a bunch more props to test and see how they go. I just had a thought that just in case people don't believe what I'm doing here, because it's a bit contrary to what we've been told, I think. So I'm going to do another test again, the same test that I just did, that I already showed you the results for, but I'll do it all in one take, and I'll probably put this as an unlisted video because it's going to take a couple of minutes and we don't really need to watch it in this video. But if you want to watch this, click on the link in the description. You can watch this all as one take. And so we have a braked prop there, and if I just run the test, start test. Oh, and this will also show you how much it wobbles around. It was fairly wobbly, maybe not at this speed. So this is 20 kilometers an hour. Thrust is 24 grams, so this is 30 kilometers an hour now. 46 grams or so. And it's wobbling about that much. So that's 40 kilometers an hour. Thrust is 80. Thrust is like 84 or something for that, I suppose. Now all I'm going to do is take off that sellotape, and then I'll run the test again without cutting. Okay, so it's free to move now, and with all the settings the same. So this is about 10 kilometers an hour. 20 kilometers an hour now. 30. 40. And then watch that prop pull forward when the airflow stops. Anyway, so yeah, I forget what the intermediate numbers were there. I was just looking at the last numbers mainly, but when it was freewheeling, it was only causing 62 grams or so of drag, and when it was braked, it was 84-ish. So it's a little bit of difference, and it's not in favor of breaking the prop at this point. So this is the first prop I've tried. It'll be interesting to see how variations come in with different sizes and pitches of prop.
So yeah, like I said, it was a pity that I couldn't get it to go faster than 40 kilometers an hour for the airspeed, but I think you'll see from these graphs here that the 40 kilometers an hour is enough to see where things are going. So this spreadsheet here, I will put a link to this in the description if you want to have a look at the document directly yourself. But just to explain what it shows, at the top here we have something called mount only, and this is what the drag was when I took the propeller off, and it was just the air pressing against that little stand that I had that was holding the propeller up. So this needs to be subtracted from all of these other numbers if we want to only be comparing the drag of the propellers, right? So this raw section here is, we've got diameter and pitch, so each prop was like, for example, 9x6, 10x5 and so on. And then the speeds and the drags of each of those combinations. Down here we have mount subtracted, so these ones up here, the raw was without the mount subtracted. So from this point on, we're just going to have numbers that have the mount subtracted for everything. First graph I made was drag versus airspeed, and we have braked and freewheeling there. The biggest point to note here is how much this diverges. So if we look at the braked section, the lowest one we have here is about 50 or so grams of drag, and the highest one we have here is about 96, I think it was. Yeah, 96 is that one there. But if we look at the freewheeling side, we have a low that's lower, like 20, 25, 30, something like that, and a high that's much higher, so it's 255, that's that one there. So the spread, it spreads out much more. The lows are lower, the highs are higher. So we have a bigger range of how the drag can change when it's freewheeling. So right away, we can see something from these two graphs here, and that is that if you were to hand me a prop and say, Chris, I'm not going to tell you what the pitch or the diameter of this prop is or anything, should it be braked? And I think we can say from just looking at this, it's a bit safer to go with braking, because the highest high you can get is probably going to be lower than the worst case when it's freewheeling, if you don't know anything about the prop at all. So when in doubt, brake the prop. So from that, I guess all the common wisdom that I've been taught, I guess, is true. If you don't want to think too much about it, when in doubt, just brake the prop. The next thing I graphed here was drag versus airspeed. Isn't that what I just did? Drag versus airspeed. Why do I have another graph of that? Oh, so this time, yeah. So these four graphs are kind of similar, but the two at the top, the colors are showing the diameter of the prop. So yeah, that's another thing we can tell here from these two graphs. The one that's the highest is red here, which is the 15-inch prop, I think. And the one that's highest here is not red, it's orange, which is that one there, 14. So they're both fairly high diameter props, but the point is that they're different. The one that was causing the worst drag is not the same prop. Yeah, that's what I wanted to show there. And so now I've done it with the colors being the pitch of the prop. So the numbers, yeah, so we still have like the low here and the high here are the same as the low here and the high here. It's just the colors that are changed according to the pitch of the prop this time. Then I started to make some scatter charts, and the idea with these charts is you're looking for some sort of a best fit line, like this down here. You can see these points are kind of lining up in a line that you could draw a best fit line through and say that even if we didn't have any points on here, we could expect it to be, say, there might be a point here we could expect, for example. And what have we got here? Drag increase. So this is the difference in drag from 10 to 40. So I'd be taking that number there, the red line at the top, and the red line at the top. So it's the difference between how much it changed from that point to that point, not from zero. And again, we have four kind of similar graphs. The top two are relating pitch to the change in drag, and at the bottom we have diameter to the change in drag. And what we can tell from this top left one is that there's not really a nice clean best fit line that we could really put in there, which tells us that the increase in drag related to pitch when the prop is braked, it doesn't really matter. Basically, pitch is not such an important thing. Over here, again, there's not really a best fit line. If anything, there might be a line going from about here down to there. Sort of seems to be sloping down a bit more than this one. See, this one here, we have a high point, low point, high point. But on this one, if anything, maybe you could say that as pitch increases, as pitch increases, so the prop is a more aggressive pitch, the drag will decrease more if it's freewheeling. Does that make sense? Hope so. Then we have the drag increase now versus diameter. Now this, although we do have a nice best fit line that we could draw here, doesn't really tell us anything we didn't know, because it's just saying that the higher the higher diameter the prop is, in other words, the larger it is, the more drag we're going to get. So it's not particularly useful, although it does show us when we compare it to this one, which is the freewheeling side, that the relationship between diameter and drag when the prop is braked is much tighter. And over here, the points are a bit more scattered, which says that the increase in diameter when the prop is freewheeling is not as important as when it's braked. So all the while I'm making these graphs, I'm like, not really finding anything particularly interesting here. Don't worry, there is a little bit that's interesting at the bottom. So then I decided to graph the difference in drag between freewheeling and braked at a certain airspeed. So this is like going back to the first graph I had and subtracting this number from that number, and then like this number from that number, and so on, or with the same color, of course. So that instead of everything being above 0, some of the lines go below 0. And when it goes below 0, it means, so we've got freewheel subtracted from braked. So I think that means that when the line goes below 0, it's actually an improvement versus the other one. I think that's what that means. And then I graphed that delta increase versus diameter, starting to get a bit of a correlation there, but it's a bit scattered still. And then again in pitch, not too much. So just to finally get this video over with, this is what I came up with, is where I stopped making graphs, because I actually saw something that made sense to me, kind of made sense to me, and it was a nice tight fit. So what I've graphed here is the change in the drag delta. So this is the difference between freewheeling and braked drag versus the screw. Now the screw is what I'm calling the diameter divided by the pitch. So 9 divided by 6 is 1.5. 11 divided by 7 is 1.57, and so on. And when you graph against this helix, it's like the slope of the helix of the tips of the prop as they spin around and move forwards, I think. Like the slope of that spiral. Anyway, it's a fairly good fit, so I figured out how to get this OpenODS Office thing, what's it called? LibreOffice. You can actually do a best fit line. So where this red line meets 0, now 0 on this graph essentially says that there's no difference between braked and freewheeling prop. They'll give you the same result. So that is about I think it's this number here, 1.75 of a value of screw. And you can see that there are actually 3 numbers below that, and those were where the freewheeling prop was more advantageous. So that's these ones here, and specifically they are 9 by 6, 11 by 7, 10 by 6. So they are where the prop has a fairly high pitch, a fairly aggressive pitch, and anything above that 1.75 mark, you're better off braking the prop, is what this says to me. So now if you said to me, hey Chris, I've got this prop here, the diameter is this and the pitch is that, do you think it should be braked or left freewheeling when you want to do gliding? Now I would say, well, divide the diameter by the pitch, and if it's more than 1.75, brake it, otherwise let it freewheel. So I think in future that is what I will be doing anyway. But like I say, if in doubt, brake the prop, and you'll probably be better off in most cases. Anyway, that was an interesting experiment, and hopefully it should be harder to argue with that kind of empirical data than it would be just by looking at somebody's anecdotal experience or what they perceived to be happening while they were flying one day, and going on for pages and pages of bickering in RC groups when you could just measure it forehead. So that's what I've done. But it doesn't really help me with my reasoning about what I was saying about the infinitely wide river at the beginning of this video, because what it seems to be saying is that when you brake the prop, you actually get less drag the closer and closer you get to this flat-on situation. Doesn't it? I mean, that's kind of what those numbers were saying. It's very strange. So yeah, I'm still puzzled about this, and maybe my visualization of water molecules coming along here, and let's say if we were doing this one here, moving the prop like that is not better or something. The flatter it gets, the worse it is to move the prop out of the way of the water. That's what that data says, which just still doesn't seem to make much sense to me when I think about it in this analogy. So maybe this analogy is just stupid. Is that what it is? I don't know. Anyway, let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and thanks for watching.